The iron bars of the Santa Rosa jailhouse felt cold against Hannah Carter's palms as she gripped them, her knuckles white with the force of her desperation, knowing that in 3 days she would hang for a murder she did not commit. Sheriff William Dawson stood outside her cell in the dim lantern light of that April evening in 1878, his weathered face impassive as stone. He was a man she had known most of her life, had trusted, had even considered a friend of her late father. Now he looked at her with eyes that held something she could not quite name, something that made her stomach turn with more than just fear. "Please," Hannah said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to remain strong. "You know me, William. You know I could never do what you are accusing me of. Thomas Riley was my business partner, nothing more. Why would I kill him?" The sheriff shifted his weight, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "Evidence does not lie, Miss Carter. Your handkerchief was found clutched in his hand. Your footprints were in the mud outside his office, and half the town heard you arguing with him just 2 days before he was shot." "We argued about the books, about discrepancies in our accounts," Hannah protested, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins as she shook her head. "I thought he was stealing from our freight business. That does not make me a killer." "Judge will be here Monday," Dawson said, turning away from her. "Nothing I can do about it now. You best make your peace." Hannah sank onto the thin cot in her cell as the sheriff's boots echoed down the hallway. The Santa Rosa jailhouse was small, just 3 cells in the back of the building that also housed the sheriff's office. Through the high window, she could see the last rays of sunlight painting the California sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere out there, Thomas Riley's real killer walked free while she waited to die. She had been 23 years old for barely a month when they arrested her. Her father had died the previous winter, leaving her as half of the freight business he had built with Thomas Riley. It should have been a blessing, a means of independence in a world that offered women few such opportunities. Instead, it had become her death sentence. The night grew cold, and Hannah wrapped the thin blanket around her shoulders. She thought of her mother, who had died when Hannah was just a child. She thought of her father, who had taught her to read ledgers and negotiate contracts, who had believed a woman could be just as capable as any man in business. She thought of all the things she would never do, never see, never experience. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by nightmares of the gallows. The next morning brought the sound of horses and raised voices in the street outside. Hannah rose from her cot, her body stiff and aching, and moved to the small window. She could see very little from her vantage point, just a slice of the main street and the buildings across from the jail. A crowd was gathering, their voices carrying through the walls. Sheriff Dawson appeared at her cell a few minutes later, his expression troubled. "Got a visitor for you," he said, and she noticed he would not quite meet her eyes. "Who?" Hannah asked, but he had already turned away. The man who entered the corridor was unlike anyone Hannah had ever seen in Santa Rosa. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders nearly spanning the width of the hallway. His hair was dark brown and fell past his shoulders, tied back with a strip of leather. His face was all hard angles and sharp planes, tanned from years in the sun, with a strong jaw covered in several days of beard growth. He wore buckskin clothing and carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who knew his own strength and had no need to prove it. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. "My name is Xavier Zane. I'm here to help you." Hannah stared at him, momentarily speechless. His eyes were a startling shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the ocean, and they studied her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "Help me?" she finally managed. "I do not understand. I've never seen you before." Xavier glanced back toward the sheriff's office, then stepped closer to the bars. The muscles in his forearms flexed as he crossed his arms over his chest. "I was hunting in the mountains east of here 3 days ago. Came down to sell my furs and heard about your situation. Something about it did not sit right with me." "Why would you care about the problems of a stranger?" Hannah asked, suspicion warring with hope in her chest. "Because I have seen innocent people hang before," Xavier said, his expression darkening. "And because I know what it looks like when someone is being railroaded. Your sheriff is hiding something." Hannah felt her heart begin to race. "You believe me?" "I believe the evidence against you is too convenient," Xavier replied. "A handkerchief that could have been taken from your home at any time. Footprints that could belong to half the women in this town. An argument that proves nothing more than a business disagreement. If I wanted to frame someone for murder, that is exactly the kind of evidence I would manufacture. But why would Sheriff Dawson want to frame me? Hannah whispered, glancing nervously toward the door. Xavier's jaw tightened. That is what I intend to find out. But I need your help. Tell me everything you know about Thomas Riley, about your business, about that night. For the next hour, Hannah told him everything. She explained how her father and Riley had started the freight business 15 years ago, how they had prospered by transporting goods between Santa Rosa and the mining camps in the mountains. She described how Riley had seemed different after her father's death, nervous and evasive. She told him about discovering the discrepancies in the ledgers, about confronting Riley, about his angry denials. He told me I did not understand business, that I was just a woman playing at being a merchant, Hannah said, the memory still stinging. But I knew those books. My father taught me himself. Money was disappearing, and Riley could not explain where it had gone. How much money? Xavier asked. Nearly $3,000 over the past 6 months, Hannah said. A significant sum. Xavier's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. $3,000 is enough to kill for, but if Riley was the one stealing, who killed him? His partner in the theft? Hannah suggested. Someone who wanted to keep him quiet? Or someone who wanted to eliminate him and frame you at the same time, Xavier said. 2 problems solved with 1 murder. The implications of his words settled over Hannah like a heavy weight. You think whoever really killed Thomas wanted me out of the way? You own half the business now, Xavier pointed out. With you hanged for murder, what happens to your share? Hannah felt her blood run cold. It would go to my only living relative, my uncle, Bernard Carter. But he lives in San Francisco. He has not been to Santa Rosa in years. Are you certain of that? Xavier asked. Hannah opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. When had she last received a letter from her uncle? She tried to remember, but the chaos of the past few days had left her thoughts scattered and confused. I do not know, she admitted. I have been so focused on the business since Father died. Uncle Bernard and I were never close. Xavier nodded slowly. I will look into it. In the meantime, is there anyone else who might benefit from Riley's death or your conviction? Hannah thought hard. Riley had a wife, Margaret, and 2 children. He had debts, I know that much. He borrowed money to expand the business last year, and the loans were coming due. Beyond that, I cannot think of anyone. Who did he borrow from? Xavier asked. The bank, mostly. Thomas Harper at First Santa Rosa Bank handled all our business loans. Xavier filed that information away. What about Sheriff Dawson? What is his connection to Riley? They were friends, I think, Hannah said. Riley came from back east originally, but he had been here long enough to be well connected. He and the sheriff played cards together sometimes, along with Mayor Hutchins and a few other men. Interesting, Xavier murmured. He looked at Hannah with those piercing eyes again. I'm going to get you out of this, Miss Carter. I give you my word. I do not even know you, Hannah said, but even as she spoke the words, she realized she wanted to trust him. There was something solid about Xavier Zane, something that made her believe he was a man who kept his promises. You will, Xavier said simply. Then he turned and strode down the corridor, leaving Hannah staring after him with her heart pounding and something that might have been hope flickering to life in her chest. Xavier found Sheriff Dawson in his office, sitting behind a scarred wooden desk covered in papers. The lawman looked up as Xavier entered, his expression carefully neutral. Thank you for letting me speak with Miss Carter, Xavier said, keeping his tone casual. Dawson shrugged. You paid the fee, and she's got precious few friends left in this town. Seemed cruel to deny her a visitor. Tell me about Thomas Riley, Xavier said, settling himself against the wall. His size made the small office feel even more cramped. What kind of man was he? The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly. Why do you care? Call it curiosity, Xavier replied. I have spent most of my life in the mountains, Sheriff. Human nature fascinates me. A man gets murdered in what should be a simple business dispute. Seems like there might be more to the story. Dawson leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. Riley was a good man, honest businessman, good father and husband. His death is a tragedy. And you are certain Miss Carter killed him? Evidence does not lie, Dawson repeated, the same words he had used with Hannah. Judge will hear the case Monday, but it is pretty clear what happened. She got angry about some imagined slight, let her temper get the best of her. Xavier kept his expression neutral, but he noted how quickly the sheriff was trying to close down the conversation. Where was Riley killed? His office at the freight yard, Dawson said. Shot twice in the chest at close range. What kind of gun? Dawson's jaw tightened. Not sure I appreciate all these questions, Mr. Zane. This is official law business. Xavier held up his hands in a placating gesture. Just trying to understand, Sheriff. No offense meant. He left the office and walked out into the bright California morning. Santa Rosa was a thriving town, its main street lined with shops and businesses that served the surrounding farms and the mining camps in the nearby mountains. The freight yard was at the eastern edge of town, and Xavier headed in that direction, aware of the stares he attracted as he walked. He was used to it. Mountain men were not uncommon in California in 1878, but they were rarely seen in town for long. Most preferred the solitude of the wilderness, coming down only when necessity demanded it. Xavier was no different in that regard. He had spent the last 7 years in the high country, trapping and hunting, speaking to another human being perhaps once every few months. But he had not always been a mountain man. Before the war, before everything had gone wrong, he had been different. He tried not to think about those days. The freight yard was quiet when Xavier arrived. The main building was a large warehouse with an attached office. A few wagons sat idle in the yard, and Xavier could see signs of recent activity, hoofprints and wheel ruts in the dirt. He approached the office carefully, noting the dark stain on the wooden floorboards near the desk. Blood. The door was unlocked, which surprised him. He had expected the sheriff to have secured the scene. Xavier stepped inside and began to look around with the practiced eye of a tracker. The desk was neat, papers stacked in orderly piles. The blood had pooled near the chair, suggesting Riley had been sitting when he was shot. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture or scattered papers. Xavier crouched down and examined the bloodstain more closely. 2 shots to the chest, the sheriff had said. That argued for someone who knew how to shoot, someone comfortable with a gun. Hannah Carter ran a freight business, but that did not mean she was a practiced killer. He searched the rest of the office methodically, looking through drawers and cabinets. Most contained routine business documents, bills of lading, receipts, letters from customers. Then, in the back of the bottom drawer of the desk, Xavier found something interesting. It was a leather-bound ledger, different from the ones stacked on the shelf. Xavier opened it and began to read. The entries were in Riley's handwriting. He could tell that much from comparing it to other documents, but these were not standard business transactions. These were payments to someone identified only by initials, W.D. $3,000, paid out over 6 months in irregular amounts. The last payment had been made just 1 week before Riley's death. W.D. Xavier thought about the sheriff, William Dawson. It could be a coincidence, or it could be the answer to why an innocent woman was sitting in a jail cell waiting to hang. Xavier slipped the ledger inside his shirt and continued searching. He found nothing else of interest in the office, so he moved outside to examine the area around the building. The ground was hard-packed dirt, but Xavier was skilled at reading sign. He found the footprints the sheriff had mentioned, small enough to be a woman's, leading from the direction of town to the office door and back again. But he also found something else. A second set of tracks, larger boots, approaching from the opposite direction. These tracks had been partially obscured, scuffed over in places as if someone had tried to hide them. Xavier followed them away from the office, through the freight yard and toward the trees beyond. The trail led him into a grove of oaks about 100 yards from the main building. Here the ground was softer and the tracks were clearer. Xavier studied them carefully, committing every detail to memory. The man who had made these tracks was heavy, probably over 200 pounds. His stride was uneven, suggesting either a limp or simply an awkward gait, and he had stood in this spot for some time, if the disturbed ground was any indication. Xavier looked back toward the office. From this position, a man would have a clear view of anyone approaching the building. Had someone been watching, waiting for the right moment? He searched the area thoroughly and found a cigarette butt, hand-rolled. Xavier picked it up carefully and sniffed it. Cheap tobacco, the kind sold at the general store. Not much to go on, but every piece of information mattered. By the time Xavier returned to town, the sun was high overhead. He was hungry, and his thoughts were racing with the implications of what he had found. The ledger alone was damning evidence, but he needed to understand the full scope of what had happened before he could clear Hannah's name. He found a small restaurant and ordered a meal, using the opportunity to listen to the conversations around him. The talk was all of the murder and the upcoming trial. Opinions seemed divided. Some people believed Hannah was guilty, swayed by the evidence and by their own prejudices about women in business. Others expressed doubt, saying they had known Hannah all her life and could not believe her capable of murder. "Shame about the whole thing," Xavier heard one man say to his companion. "Carter was a good man, raised that girl right, but I suppose some women just cannot handle the responsibility of business, get too emotional." Xavier bit back a sharp response and focused on his food. Anger would not help Hannah. Only evidence and truth would save her now. After eating, Xavier made his way to the bank. It was a substantial building, brick and stone, speaking to the prosperity of Santa Rosa. Inside, he found a well-appointed lobby with polished wood and brass fixtures. A clerk directed him to the office of Thomas Harper, the bank manager. Harper was a thin man in his 40s, with thinning hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. He looked up from his desk as Xavier entered, his expression registering surprise at the mountain man's appearance. "Can I help you?" Harper asked cautiously. "I hope so," Xavier said, remaining standing despite the chair across from the desk. He was used to making people nervous with his size, and sometimes that worked to his advantage. "I'm looking into the murder of Thomas Riley. I understand he had loans with your bank?" Harper's expression became guarded. "That is confidential banking business, sir. I cannot discuss it with you." Xavier leaned forward slightly, placing his hands on the desk. His forearms were nearly as thick as most men's legs, corded with muscle from years of hard living. "Miss Hannah Carter is going to hang for a murder she did not commit unless I can find the truth. Now, you can tell me about Riley's loans, or you can explain to everyone in this town how your refusal to cooperate sent an innocent woman to the gallows." Harper swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his thin neck. "I could call for the sheriff." "You could," Xavier agreed. "But I think you might be just as interested in the truth as I am, Mr. Harper, because if Riley was murdered over money, and that money came from this bank, you might find yourself in a difficult position." The banker stared at him for a long moment, then sighed and removed his spectacles to clean them. "What exactly do you want to know?" "How much did Riley owe the bank?" Harper hesitated, then pulled out a file from his desk drawer. $5,000. The loan was for expansion of the freight business. It was coming due next month, and frankly, I was concerned about whether Mr. Riley would be able to pay." "Why is that?" Xavier asked. "The business had been profitable under Jeremiah Carter's management," Harper explained. "But after Carter died, Riley seemed to struggle. He missed a payment in March, which was unusual. When I spoke to him about it, he assured me it was just a temporary setback." "Did he say what caused the setback?" "No, and I did not press. Banking is about relationships, Mr. Zane. But I had decided that if the loan was not paid in full by the due date, I would have to call it in." "What would that have meant for the business?" "The bank would have taken possession of assets to cover the debt, the wagons, the warehouse, likely the business itself." Xavier absorbed this information. "What happens to the loan now that Riley is dead?" "That depends on who inherits his share of the business," Harper said. "If Miss Carter had inherited everything, she would have been responsible for the full amount. But given her current situation, I imagine the business will be sold to settle debts." "And who would be first in line to buy it?" Harper's expression became uncomfortable. "I really should not speculate." Xavier waited, saying nothing, just looking at the banker with steady eyes. Harper broke first. "Bernard Carter contacted me 2 weeks ago. He wanted to know about the state of his brother's business, about any outstanding debts or obligations. He indicated he might be interested in purchasing Riley's share if it became available. 2 weeks ago, before the murder?" Xavier felt the pieces beginning to fall into place. "Is Bernard Carter in Santa Rosa now?" Xavier asked. "I believe so," Harper said. "He is staying at the hotel." Xavier thanked the banker and left, his mind working through the new information. Bernard Carter had been in town before his niece was arrested. He had known about the business debts. And he would benefit from Hannah's conviction, inheriting her share of the business and gaining control of everything his brother had built. But was he also the WD in the ledger? That did not fit, unless the initials stood for something else entirely. Xavier's next stop was the hotel, a 2-story building on Main Street. The clerk at the desk confirmed that Bernard Carter was indeed a guest, room 7 on the 2nd floor. Xavier took the stairs 2 at a time and knocked on the door. The man who answered was in his 50s, with graying hair and a paunch that spoke of comfortable living. He looked nothing like Hannah, lacking her auburn coloring and fine bone structure. "Mr. Carter?" Xavier asked. "Yes?" The man looked Xavier up and down, his expression registering distaste. "What do you want?" "My name is Xavier Zane. I would like to talk to you about your niece." Bernard Carter's face hardened. "I have nothing to say about Hannah. She has brought shame on my family name. My poor brother must be turning in his grave." "Your niece is innocent," Xavier said flatly, "and I can prove it, but I need your cooperation." "Innocent?" Carter snorted. "The evidence says otherwise. Hannah always was headstrong, too independent for her own good. Jeremiah should have married her off years ago instead of filling her head with nonsense about running a business." Xavier felt his temper rising, but kept it in check. "When did you arrive in Santa Rosa?" "I fail to see how that is any of your business," Carter said, starting to close the door. Xavier put his hand against the door, holding it open with effortless strength. "Answer the question, Mr. Carter." Carter's eyes widened with fear, and he took a step back. 2 weeks ago, I came when I heard Jeremiah's business was struggling. I wanted to see if I could help." "Help by buying out Riley's share?" Xavier asked. "How did you know about that?" Carter demanded. "Did you kill Thomas Riley?" Xavier asked bluntly. Carter's face went pale, then red with anger. "Get out! How dare you accuse me? Sheriff! Someone call the sheriff!" Xavier stepped back, raising his hands. He had learned what he needed. Bernard Carter was a pompous fool, but he was not a killer. The fear in his eyes had been genuine, and Xavier had spent enough time tracking both animals and men to recognize real terror when he saw it. "My apologies," Xavier said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm just trying to help your niece." He left Carter sputtering and descended the stairs. As he reached the lobby, he nearly collided with a woman in a fine dress, her dark hair styled elaborately. "Excuse me," Xavier said, stepping aside. The woman looked up at him, and he saw her eyes were red from crying. "Are you the man who is asking questions about Thomas Riley?" Xavier studied her more carefully. She was in her 30s, handsome rather than beautiful, with the worn look of someone who had not slept well in days. "I am. And you are?" "Margaret Riley. Thomas was my husband." Her voice broke slightly on the last word. "I need to speak with you, please, not here. Can you meet me at the church in an hour?" Xavier agreed, and Margaret Riley hurried away. He watched her go, noting the tension in her shoulders, the way she glanced around nervously as if afraid of being seen talking to him. An hour gave him time to check on Hannah. He returned to the jail and found her sitting on her cot, looking pale and exhausted. But her eyes brightened when she saw him. "Did you learn anything?" she asked, rising and moving to the bars. Xavier glanced toward the sheriff's office. Dawson was not in sight. He pulled the ledger from inside his shirt and showed it to Hannah. "Do you recognize this?" Hannah took it carefully through the bars and opened it. Her eyes widened as she read the entries. "This is Thomas's handwriting, but these are not our regular accounts. What does WD mean?" "That is what I am trying to determine," Xavier said quietly. "Could it be William Dawson?" Hannah looked shocked. "The sheriff? But why would Thomas be paying him money? Blackmail, perhaps, or payment for protection, or simply corruption." Xavier's expression was grim. $3,000 is a lot of money to hide from your business partner." "This proves I was right about the missing money," Hannah said, a note of vindication in her voice. "I knew Thomas was stealing from the business. But if he was stealing to pay someone else, that means his death might have been about silencing him," Xavier pointed out. "Hannah, I need to know something. Is there any chance your father was involved in anything illegal?" Hannah's face hardened. "My father was the most honest man I ever knew. Whatever Thomas was involved in, it had nothing to do with my father." Xavier nodded, accepting her certainty. "All right, I believe you. But I need to figure out who WD is and why Riley was paying him. I am meeting with Riley's widow in a few minutes. Maybe she knows something." "Be careful," Hannah said softly. "Someone already killed once to protect their secret. They might kill again." Xavier met her eyes, those warm brown eyes that held both fear and hope. "I can take care of myself, Miss Carter. You just keep your spirits up. I will not let you hang for something you did not do." He left before she could respond, before he could examine too closely why the thought of her hanging filled him with such fierce determination. He had known her for less than a day, but already Hannah Carter had gotten under his skin in a way no one had in years. The church was a simple white building at the north end of town, with a tall steeple and stained glass windows. Xavier found Margaret Riley waiting in one of the back pews, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He slid into the pew beside her, his size making the wooden seat feel cramped. "Mrs. Riley, thank you for meeting me." Margaret turned to look at him, and Xavier saw the grief etched into her face. "I do not know if I should be doing this," she whispered, "but I cannot let an innocent woman hang, not even to protect my husband's memory." Xavier waited, letting her gather her thoughts. "Thomas was a good man," Margaret said finally, "but he was weak. 6 months ago he came home late one night, drunk and terrified. He told me he had done something terrible, something he could not take back." "What did he do?" Xavier asked gently. Margaret's hands twisted in her lap. "He had been gambling, cards mostly, with some of the men in town. He lost badly, very badly, thousands of dollars we did not have. The man he owed threatened him, said he would take everything we had, leave my children and me in the street." "Who was the man?" Xavier pressed. "I do not know his name," Margaret said. "Thomas would not tell me, but he said this man had power in Santa Rosa, connections. He said the only way to pay off the debt was to steal from the business." Xavier felt the pieces clicking together. "And your husband started embezzling from the freight company." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I begged him not to. I told him to go to Hannah, to explain, to ask for help, but he was too ashamed, and he was afraid of what this man would do if he did not pay." "Did your husband ever mention the initials WD?" Margaret shook her head. "No, I am sorry. I do not know who he was paying." "Do you know where your husband gambled?" Xavier asked. "The saloon, mostly. The Silver Star, on the edge of town. But there were private games, too, in back rooms. Thomas did not tell me much about them." Xavier thought about this. "Mrs. Riley, do you believe Hannah Carter killed your husband?" Margaret met his eyes, her own filled with anguish. "No. Hannah is a good woman. She was angry with Thomas, justifiably so. But she is not a killer. Someone murdered my husband, Mr. Zane, someone who wanted to silence him and destroy Hannah at the same time." "Who knew about the gambling debts?" Xavier asked. "I do not know. Thomas was so secretive about it all. But someone knew. Someone who saw an opportunity when Hannah confronted Thomas about the missing money." Xavier stood, his mind racing with new information. "Thank you, Mrs. Riley. You have been very helpful. And for what it is worth, I am sorry for your loss." Margaret caught his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Find the truth, Mr. Zane, for Thomas, for Hannah, for my children who deserve to know their father did not die for nothing." Xavier promised he would, and left the church. The sun was lowering toward the western horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. He had perhaps 24 hours before the judge arrived and Hannah's trial began. He needed to work fast. The Silver Star Saloon was doing brisk business when Xavier entered. The noise level dropped noticeably as patrons noticed the mountain man, but Xavier ignored the stares and made his way to the bar. He ordered a whiskey and waited for the bartender, a burly man with a scarred face and suspicious eyes. "Help you with something?" the bartender asked as he poured the drink. "Information," Xavier said, sliding a gold coin across the bar. "About private card games." The bartender glanced at the coin, then at Xavier's face. Whatever he saw there made him pick up the coin and pocket it. "What do you want to know?" "Thomas Riley gambled here. Who ran the games he played in?" The bartender's expression became wary. "That is dangerous information, friend." Xavier placed another coin on the bar, then a third. "I am a dangerous man." The bartender studied him for a long moment, then leaned in close. Mayor Hutchins runs the high-stakes games, backroom on Saturday nights, but you did not hear that from me. Mayor Hutchins. Xavier filed that name away. Who else plays in these games? The important men in town, bank manager, store owners, the sheriff. Xavier felt his pulse quicken. Sheriff Dawson plays in these games? The bartender nodded. Regular player. Usually does pretty well too, far as I can tell. Xavier finished his whiskey and left the saloon, his mind working through the implications. If Dawson was part of the gambling ring, if he knew about Riley's debts, then the initials WD might indeed stand for William Dawson. But was the sheriff taking payments from Riley? Or was there someone else involved? The mayor's office was closed for the evening, but Xavier was not deterred. He made his way to the residential area of town, asking directions until he found the mayor's house, a substantial 2-story home with a manicured lawn. Xavier knocked on the door, which was answered by a maid who took one look at him and tried to close it again. Xavier stopped the door with his hand. I need to speak with Mayor Hutchins, Xavier said firmly. It is about the Thomas Riley murder. The maid disappeared and returned a moment later with the mayor himself, a portly man in his 50s with mutton chop whiskers and an expression of irritation. What is the meaning of this? Hutchins demanded. Do you have any idea what time it is? I know you run illegal gambling games, Xavier said bluntly. I know Thomas Riley owed you money, and I know you are letting an innocent woman take the blame for his murder. The mayor's face went white, then purple with rage. How dare you? I will have you arrested. Go ahead, Xavier said calmly, and I will tell everyone in Santa Rosa exactly what I have learned. I wonder how your voters will feel about their mayor running crooked card games and framing women for murder. Hutchins sputtered, but Xavier could see the fear in his eyes. I did not kill Thomas Riley, and I certainly did not frame anyone. Then tell me the truth, Xavier demanded. Who did Riley owe money to? The mayor looked around nervously, as if afraid of being overheard. Not here. Meet me at my office in an hour. I will tell you everything. Xavier considered refusing, but he sensed the mayor was genuinely frightened. 1 hour, he agreed. And if you are not there, I go straight to the newspaper with everything I know. He left Hutchins standing in his doorway and made his way back toward the center of town. The streets were mostly empty now, the respectable citizens having gone home for the evening. Xavier found himself thinking about Hannah, alone in that cell, facing a death sentence for something she did not do. He thought about the fear in her eyes when he first saw her and the hope that had sparked to life when he promised to help. He thought about the intelligence in her face, the strength in her bearing despite her circumstances. Hannah Carter was unlike any woman he had ever met, and he found himself drawn to her in ways that both surprised and concerned him. Xavier had spent 7 years alone in the mountains for a reason. After the war, after losing his brother and watching his family's farm burn, he had wanted nothing to do with people and their endless capacity for cruelty and betrayal. The wilderness was honest. An animal killed to eat or to protect itself, not out of greed or malice. A blizzard did not play favorites, a mountain did not lie. But Hannah had reminded him of something he had almost forgotten, that some people were worth fighting for. The mayor's office was in the town hall, a brick building that also housed the courtroom where Hannah's trial would be held. Xavier arrived early and waited in the shadows across the street, watching. He had learned long ago that trusting men like Hutchins was a good way to get yourself killed. True to his word, the mayor appeared 15 minutes before the appointed hour, unlocking the office and lighting a lamp inside. Xavier waited another few minutes, watching to see if anyone followed Hutchins, but the street remained empty. Finally, he crossed and entered the office. Hutchins jumped when Xavier appeared in the doorway. Lord, man, you move like a ghost. You said you would tell me everything, Xavier said, closing the door behind him. The mayor sank into his chair and pulled out a bottle of whiskey from his desk drawer. He poured himself a generous measure and drank it down before speaking. I do run the card games, Hutchins admitted. Have for years. It is good money, and it keeps the important men in town happy. Thomas Riley started playing about a year ago. At first he was just another player, winning some, losing some, but then his luck turned bad. How bad? Xavier asked. $5,000 bad, Hutchins said. He kept doubling down, sure his luck would change. It never did. Xavier thought about the bank loan, also for $5,000. What did you do? I gave him terms to pay it back, Hutchins said. Interest was steep but manageable if he was smart about it. Riley agreed. But he could not pay, Xavier guessed. Hutchins shook his head. He made some payments, a few hundred here and there, but it was not enough. I told him I would give him until the end of April, but if he did not have the full amount by then, I would take his share of the freight business. So you had no reason to kill him, Xavier said slowly. He was more valuable to you alive. Exactly, Hutchins said, leaning forward earnestly. Why would I kill someone who owed me money? That makes no sense. Then who did kill him? Xavier demanded. Someone shot Riley and framed Hannah Carter for it. Someone who benefits from both their deaths. Hutchins poured himself another drink. I do not know, but I will tell you this. I was not the only person Riley owed money to. Xavier felt his pulse quicken. Who else? William Dawson, Hutchins said. The sheriff played in my games too. He and Riley had some kind of private arrangement on the side. I do not know the details, but I saw them talking in corners. Real secretive like. W.D. William Dawson. It all came back to the sheriff. Do you know what their arrangement was? Xavier asked. Hutchins shook his head. Dawson is a careful man. He does not share his business with anyone. But I will tell you this. He's been living well beyond his means lately. New clothes, expensive dinners at the hotel. A sheriff's salary does not pay for that kind of lifestyle. Xavier's mind raced. If Dawson was taking payments from Riley, what was he providing in return? Protection? Help with the embezzlement? And why would he then kill Riley and frame Hannah? Unless it was not about the gambling debts at all, unless it was about something else entirely. Does the name Bernard Carter mean anything to you? Xavier asked suddenly. Hutchins frowned. Hannah's uncle? I know of him. He's been in town a couple weeks, staying at the hotel. Why? Did he ever come to your card games? No, I would remember that. He's not from around here. Xavier nodded slowly, a theory beginning to form in his mind. Thank you, Mayor. You have been very helpful. What are you going to do? Hutchins asked nervously. I'm going to prove who really killed Thomas Riley, Xavier said, and I'm going to make sure Hannah Carter does not hang. He left the mayor's office and stood in the street for a moment, thinking through everything he had learned. Riley had been stealing from the business to pay gambling debts to Hutchins and some kind of payment to Sheriff Dawson. Hannah had discovered the theft and confronted Riley. Then Riley was murdered and Hannah framed for it. Who benefited? Not Hutchins, who lost a source of income. Not Margaret Riley, who was left widowed with children and debts. Not Hannah, who was facing the gallows. But Bernard Carter stood to inherit a profitable business if his niece was convicted. And Sheriff Dawson was being paid for something he wanted to keep hidden badly enough to frame an innocent woman. Xavier needed proof, hard evidence that would stand up in court and free Hannah. The ledger was a start, but it was not enough. He needed to know what Dawson was being paid for, and he needed to connect the sheriff directly to Riley's murder, which meant he needed to search the sheriff's office. Xavier made his way back to the jail. The building was dark except for a single lamp burning in the front office. Through the window, he could see Sheriff Dawson sitting at his desk, working on paperwork. Xavier moved silently around to the back of the building, where the cells were located. The high window of Hannah's cell showed a faint glow of lamplight. He found a water barrel and used it to boost himself up to the window. Hannah was lying on her cot, still dressed, staring at the ceiling. She looked small and vulnerable in the dim light, and Xavier felt something twist in his chest. Hannah, he called softly. She sat up immediately, her eyes widening as she saw his face at the window. Xavier, what are you doing? I need to search the sheriff's office, Xavier explained quietly, but I need him distracted. Can you create some kind of commotion in about 10 minutes? Hannah's face showed her confusion, but she nodded. I will think of something. But Xavier, please be careful. If Dawson catches you. He will not, Xavier said with more confidence than he felt. I am good at not being caught. He dropped back to the ground and moved to the front of the building. Finding a position in the shadows where he could see through the window, Xavier settled in to wait. 8 minutes passed, then 9. Then he heard Hannah's voice, loud and panicked. Help! Someone help me! There is a rat in my cell! A huge rat! Xavier heard Dawson curse and the scrape of a chair. The sheriff grabbed a lamp and headed toward the back, his heavy footsteps echoing through the building. Xavier moved fast. He crossed to the front door, which Dawson had left unlocked, and slipped inside. The office was cluttered with papers, wanted posters, and various supplies. Xavier began searching methodically, working through the desk drawers first. He could hear Dawson talking to Hannah, his voice irritated. "I do not see any rat, Miss Carter." It was there. It ran under the cot. Xavier continued searching. He found routine paperwork, official documents, nothing incriminating. Then, in the bottom drawer of a filing cabinet, he found a metal box with a padlock. Xavier pulled out his knife and worked the lock. It took precious seconds, but finally the mechanism gave way. Inside the box were documents, official-looking papers with stamps and seals. Xavier pulled them out and began reading quickly. They were deeds. Property deeds for land around Santa Rosa, all signed over to William Dawson. And every one of them bore Thomas Riley's signature. Xavier felt a surge of triumph. This was it. Riley had been signing over property to Dawson, probably as payment for the sheriff's silence about something. But what? Xavier flipped through more papers and found the answer. Bills of lading for freight shipments that did not appear in the official business ledgers. Illegal shipments, smuggled goods being transported through Riley's freight business. Dawson had been using his position as sheriff to protect a smuggling operation, and he had been taking payment in the form of land and money. When Hannah discovered the missing funds, when she confronted Riley, Dawson must have realized his arrangement was in danger. So he killed Riley to silence him and framed Hannah to eliminate the other witness to the embezzlement. Xavier took the documents and returned the box to its place. He could hear Dawson still talking to Hannah, his tone getting more irritated. "There is no rat, Miss Carter. You are wasting my time." "I swear I saw it." Xavier slipped back out the front door and melted into the shadows just as Dawson returned to his office, muttering under his breath about hysterical women. Xavier made his way around to Hannah's window again and climbed up. "I got what I needed," he said quietly. Hannah moved to the window, relief flooding her face. "What did you find?" Xavier explained quickly about the deeds and the smuggling operation. Hannah's eyes grew wide. "My father would never have allowed that," she said fiercely. "Thomas must have started after Father died. That is why he was so nervous when I began looking at the books. He knew I would find evidence of the illegal shipments." "Dawson killed him to protect himself," Xavier said. "And he framed you because with both you and Riley gone, the business would be sold and all evidence of the smuggling would disappear." "But why involve my uncle?" Hannah asked. "I do not think he did," Xavier replied. "I think Bernard showing up was just coincidental timing. Dawson saw an opportunity to frame you and took it." Hannah gripped the bars of the window. "What do we do now? Will this evidence be enough to free me?" Xavier's expression grew grim. "It should be, but we have a problem. Dawson is the law in Santa Rosa. If I go to the judge with this evidence, Dawson will know. He could destroy records, intimidate witnesses, or simply arrest me for theft and burglary. We need to be smart about this." "The judge arrives tomorrow," Hannah said. "My trial is supposed to start the day after." "Then we have one day to build our case and present it in a way that Dawson cannot suppress," Xavier said. He looked at Hannah through the bars, seeing the intelligence and courage in her eyes. "Trust me, Hannah, I will get you out of this." She reached through the bars and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his bearded cheek. "I do trust you, Xavier. I do not understand why, but I do. You could have ridden away and left me to my fate. Instead, you are risking everything to save me." Xavier covered her hand with his own, feeling the warmth of her skin. "You deserve justice, Hannah, and I'm going to make sure you get it." He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that in the short time he had known her, she had awakened something in him he thought long dead. But this was not the time. First, he had to free her. Then, perhaps there would be time for other conversations. Xavier spent the rest of the night preparing. He made copies of the key documents he had taken from Dawson's office, hiding the originals in a safe place. He spoke to Margaret Riley again, getting her statement about her husband's gambling debts and fear of the sheriff. He tracked down the bartender from the Silver Star and convinced him to testify about the illegal card games and Dawson's involvement. By the time the sun rose on Sunday morning, Xavier had built a case against Sheriff Dawson that would hold up in any court. The question was how to present it without giving the sheriff a chance to destroy the evidence or flee town. The answer came from an unexpected source. Xavier was having breakfast at the restaurant when Thomas Harper, the bank manager, approached his table. "Mr. Zane," Harper said quietly, "may I speak with you?" Xavier gestured to the empty chair across from him. Harper sat, looking nervous but determined. "I heard you have been asking questions about Thomas Riley and the sheriff," Harper said. "I think I may have information that could help Miss Carter." Xavier listened as Harper explained that Dawson had recently tried to deposit a large sum of cash at the bank, nearly $1,000. When Harper had asked about the source of the funds, Dawson had been evasive. Harper had been suspicious but had not felt he could refuse the business. "But if the sheriff is involved in illegal activities, I cannot continue to provide him banking services," Harper said. "I have a responsibility to this community." "Will you testify to this in court?" Xavier asked. Harper hesitated, then nodded. "If it will help clear Miss Carter, yes, I will testify." With Harper's testimony added to everything else, Xavier knew he had enough to prove Dawson's corruption and Hannah's innocence, but he still needed to figure out how to present the evidence without Dawson interfering. The solution came to him as he left the restaurant. Judge Mitchell, who was scheduled to hear Hannah's case, was arriving that afternoon. Instead of waiting for the trial, Xavier would present his evidence to the judge privately before Dawson knew what was happening. Once the judge understood the full scope of the corruption, he could take steps to protect the witnesses and ensure a fair hearing. Xavier spent the rest of the morning finalizing his case. He organized the documents, wrote out statements from the witnesses, and prepared a clear timeline of events that showed how Dawson had murdered Riley and framed Hannah. The judge arrived in Santa Rosa just after noon, accompanied by 2 federal marshals. Judge Mitchell was a severe-looking man in his 60s, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. Xavier intercepted him at the hotel before he could meet with the sheriff. "Judge Mitchell," Xavier said, stepping forward, "my name is Xavier Zane. I have evidence that Sheriff Dawson is corrupt and that Hannah Carter is innocent of murder. I need to speak with you privately before he knows I am making these accusations." The judge studied Xavier with those sharp eyes. "Those are serious charges, Mr. Zane." "I have serious evidence," Xavier replied. He showed the judge the deeds, the ledger, the statements from witnesses. Judge Mitchell read through everything carefully, his expression growing grimmer by the moment. Finally, he looked up at Xavier. "This is damning evidence indeed. If what you say is true, Sheriff Dawson has committed multiple crimes, including murder and obstruction of justice." "It is all true," Xavier said, "and I have witnesses ready to testify." The judge turned to the federal marshals. "Gentlemen, I want you to go to the jail and take Sheriff Dawson into custody. Charges are corruption, smuggling, murder, and conspiracy to commit judicial murder. Do not let him destroy any evidence." The marshals nodded and left immediately. Judge Mitchell looked at Xavier with something approaching respect. "You have done excellent work here, Mr. Zane. Miss Carter is fortunate to have someone like you fighting for her." "I just want to see justice done," Xavier said. "Justice will be done," the judge promised. "I will personally oversee this matter from here on out." Xavier accompanied the judge to the jail. They arrived to find the marshals had already arrested Dawson, who was protesting loudly about his treatment. The sheriff's face went pale when he saw Xavier standing with the judge. "This is outrageous," Dawson shouted. "I am the law in this town." "You were the law," Judge Mitchell said coldly. "Now you are just another criminal facing justice. Take him to the hotel and keep him under guard. I will conduct a preliminary hearing this afternoon." As the marshals led Dawson away, Xavier made his way to Hannah's cell. She was standing at the bars, her face filled with hope and fear. "Xavier, what is happening? I heard shouting." "You are free, Hannah," Xavier said, his voice rough with emotion. "The judge has ordered your release. Dawson is under arrest for murder." Hannah's legs seemed to give out and she sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Free? I'm really free?" Xavier waited while the deputy, looking stunned by the morning's events, unlocked the cell door. Then Hannah was out, stumbling toward him, and Xavier caught her in his arms. She was small against his chest, her body shaking with sobs of relief and exhaustion. "It is over," Xavier murmured, holding her close. "You are safe now." Hannah clung to him, her hands fisting in his buckskin shirt. "You saved my life. How can I ever repay you?" Xavier pulled back slightly so he could see her face. Her eyes were red from crying, but filled with so much life, so much emotion that it took his breath away. "You do not owe me anything, Hannah. I owe you everything," she whispered. The preliminary hearing was held that afternoon in the courthouse. Judge Mitchell presided, and the courtroom was packed with citizens of Santa Rosa who had heard about the sheriff's arrest and wanted to see what would happen. Xavier presented all the evidence he had gathered. He explained the smuggling operation, the gambling debts, the payments Riley had been making to Dawson. He showed the judge the property deeds and the secret ledger. He called witnesses: Margaret Riley, Thomas Harper, the bartender, even Mayor Hutchins, who reluctantly confirmed Dawson's involvement in the illegal card games. Dawson tried to maintain his innocence at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. When presented with the deeds bearing Riley's signature, the sheriff's composure cracked. He admitted to the smuggling and to taking payments from Riley, but he insisted he had not killed anyone. "I did not shoot Thomas Riley," Dawson shouted. "Why would I kill my own source of income?" "Because Hannah Carter discovered the embezzlement," Xavier said. "You knew that if she kept investigating, she would find evidence of the smuggling. So you killed Riley to silence him, and you framed Hannah to eliminate her as a threat. With both of them gone, you thought the business would be sold and all the evidence would disappear." Dawson's face contorted with rage and fear. "You cannot prove that! You have no evidence that I pulled the trigger!" But Xavier had one more piece of evidence. He pulled out the cigarette butt he had found near the freight yard office. "This was found at the spot where the killer waited before murdering Riley. It is the same brand you smoke, Sheriff. I checked the butts in the ashtray on your desk." It was not conclusive proof by itself, but combined with everything else, it was enough. Judge Mitchell ordered Dawson held for trial on charges of murder, smuggling, conspiracy, and corruption. The former sheriff was led away in chains, his protests echoing through the courthouse. Judge Mitchell then formally dismissed all charges against Hannah Carter, declaring her innocent of all crimes. The courtroom erupted in applause, and Hannah found herself surrounded by people apologizing, congratulating her, expressing shame that they had doubted her. Through it all, Hannah kept looking for Xavier. She finally found him standing at the back of the courtroom, watching her with those intense gray-blue eyes. She pushed through the crowd toward him, and when she reached him, he held out his hand. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let us get you out of here." They walked out of the courthouse together into the late afternoon sunshine. Hannah took a deep breath of free air, feeling like she was truly breathing for the first time in days. "What happens now?" she asked. Xavier looked at her, at this woman who had been through so much and still stood strong. "That is up to you. Your business is yours now. You can rebuild it, run it the way your father would have wanted." Hannah nodded slowly. "Yes, I can do that. The debts will be difficult, but I can manage them." She paused, then looked up at Xavier. "Will you stay? In Santa Rosa, I mean. At least for a little while?" Xavier felt his heart beating faster. "Why would I do that?" "Because I want to get to know you better," Hannah said boldly. "You saved my life, Xavier. But more than that, you believed in me when no one else did. You saw me as a person, not just a woman to be pitied or dismissed. I want to know more about the man who did that." Xavier found himself smiling, something he had not done much in recent years. "I am not an easy man to know, Hannah. I have spent years alone in the mountains. I am not good with people or social niceties." "I do not want social niceties," Hannah said. "I want honesty. I want someone who sees me for who I really am." She reached out and took his hand, her small fingers intertwining with his. "Stay, Xavier. Please." He looked down at their joined hands, at the way her skin looked so pale and delicate against his sun-darkened roughness. He thought about the mountains, about the solitary life he had lived for so long, and he thought about how empty that life suddenly seemed compared to the possibility of knowing Hannah Carter better. "I will stay for a while," Xavier said, "but I am not a town person, Hannah. I do not know if I can be what you need." "Why do not we find out?" Hannah suggested, her brown eyes warm with hope and something else, something that made Xavier's breath catch. Over the following weeks, Santa Rosa slowly returned to normal. Sheriff Dawson was tried, convicted, and sentenced to hang for the murder of Thomas Riley. Bernard Carter returned to San Francisco, his hopes of inheriting his niece's business dashed. Margaret Riley and her children received financial support from the town's businessmen, who felt guilty for not seeing the truth sooner. And Xavier stayed. He told himself it was just temporary, that he was helping Hannah get the freight business back on its feet. He worked with her to untangle the financial mess Riley had left behind, using his surprising head for numbers to reorganize the accounts and negotiate better terms with creditors. He helped repair wagons and taught her employees how to handle themselves better on dangerous mountain roads. But the truth was, he stayed because of Hannah. She fascinated him, this strong-willed woman who refused to let the world tell her what she could not do. She ran her business with intelligence and determination, earning the respect even of men who had initially doubted her abilities. She was kind to her employees, fair in her dealings, and passionate about maintaining her father's legacy. And when she looked at Xavier, when she smiled at him or touched his hand or asked his opinion on business matters, he felt like he could do anything. They spent their evenings together, often sharing dinner at Hannah's modest home near the edge of town. She would cook, insisting that she was tired of restaurant food, and they would talk for hours. Xavier found himself telling her things he had never told anyone, about his brother's death in the war, about watching his family's farm burn, about the years of grief and anger that had driven him into the wilderness. Hannah listened without judgment, her eyes filled with understanding. She told him about her own losses, her mother's early death, her father's passing, the loneliness of being a woman in a man's world. They shared their pain and found comfort in each other's presence. One evening in late May, they were sitting on Hannah's porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Xavier was very aware of how close Hannah was sitting to him, how her shoulder brushed against his arm. "Xavier," Hannah said softly, "can I ask you something?" "Always," he replied. "Why did you really help me? I have been thinking about it, and I cannot quite understand why a mountain man would risk so much for a stranger." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. "At first, I told myself it was about justice. I had seen too many innocent people suffer. But the truth is, from the moment I saw you in that cell, something changed. You were not broken, Hannah. You were scared and desperate, but you were not broken. You had strength and dignity even in the worst circumstances. I admired that. I admired you." Hannah turned to look at him, and Xavier saw tears shining in her eyes. "I was so alone," she whispered, "and then you appeared, like something out of a dream. This strong, capable man who actually listened to me, who believed me. Do you know how rare that is?" Xavier reached out and cupped her face in his large hand, his thumb gently brushing away a tear. "You deserve to be believed. Hannah, you deserve so much more than this town has given you." "I have you," Hannah said, leaning into his touch. "That is more than I ever expected." Xavier's heart was pounding as he leaned down, giving her every chance to pull away, but Hannah did not pull away. She tilted her face up to meet his, and when their lips touched, Xavier felt like he had finally come home after years of wandering. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, two people learning each other. Then Hannah's hands came up to grip his shoulders, and Xavier pulled her closer, deepening the kiss. She tasted like the honey cake they had eaten for dessert, sweet and warm and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against Hannah's. "I have to tell you something," he said hoarsely. "I'm falling in love with you. I think I started falling the moment I saw you, and it scares me, because I have not let myself care about anyone in so long." Hannah's smile was radiant. "I'm falling in love with you too, Xavier, and I am not scared at all. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." They sat on that porch until the stars came out, holding each other and talking about the future. Xavier admitted that he could not imagine going back to the mountains without Hannah. Hannah confessed that she had been hoping he would stay permanently, that she wanted to build a life with him. "I am not an easy man," Xavier warned her again. "I have rough edges and bad habits. I'm used to solitude. I might not be good at being part of a town, part of a community." "You do not have to change who you are," Hannah said. "I fell in love with the man you are now. We will figure it out together." Xavier kissed her again, sealing the promise between them. They were married in August of 1878, in a simple ceremony at the same church where Xavier had met with Margaret Riley months before. The town turned out for the wedding, curious to see the mountain man marrying the freight company owner. Hannah wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers that Xavier had picked for her from the hills outside town. Xavier wore new clothes, store-bought for the occasion, though he still wore his hair long and his beard trimmed but not shaved. When the preacher asked if he would take Hannah to be his wife, Xavier's "I will" rang out clear and strong. And when Hannah made her vows, her voice was steady and sure, her eyes locked on Xavier's face. They honeymooned by traveling into the mountains together. Xavier took Hannah to his cabin, showing her the world he had lived in for 7 years. He taught her how to track animals, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to find her way by the stars. Hannah was an eager student, marveling at the beauty of the wilderness and Xavier's deep knowledge of it. At night, they lay together in Xavier's bed, learning each other's bodies with tenderness and passion. Xavier had been with women before, but never like this, never with this depth of feeling and connection. Every touch, every kiss felt like a revelation. "I love you," Hannah whispered as they lay tangled together one evening, the cabin lit only by the fire. "I love you so much it almost hurts." Xavier pulled her closer, his arms wrapped protectively around her smaller form. "I love you too. You've given me something I thought I had lost forever. Hope, a future, a reason to be part of the world again." When they returned to Santa Rosa, it was as a united front. Hannah continued to run the freight business, but now Xavier worked openly as her partner and husband. His strength and experience proved invaluable, and under their joint management, the business not only recovered from the damage Riley had done, but began to prosper. Xavier discovered that he did not mind town life as much as he had feared, as long as Hannah was beside him. She was his anchor, his reason for staying. And slowly, he began to build relationships with other people in Santa Rosa. He became friends with some of the freighters who worked for Hannah, men who respected his knowledge and experience. He helped the new sheriff, a fair and honest man named James Monroe, track down a gang of bandits that had been plaguing the area. But his favorite times were still the quiet evenings at home with Hannah, talking about their day, planning for the future, simply being together. In the spring of 1879, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening after dinner, her eyes sparkling with joy and a little nervousness. "We're going to have a baby," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "Are you happy?" Xavier felt emotion well up in his chest, so intense it almost choked him. "Happy? Hannah, I'm terrified and thrilled, and more grateful than I know how to express. A child. Our child." He pulled her into his arms and held her close, feeling her heart beating against his chest. They had talked about having children, about building a family together, but the reality of it was overwhelming in the best possible way. "We are going to be parents," Hannah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I do not know the first thing about being a mother." "We will learn together," Xavier promised, "just like we have learned everything else." The pregnancy was not easy. Hannah suffered from terrible nausea in the early months, and Xavier hovered over her anxiously, trying to help. He brought her tea and crackers, rubbed her feet when they swelled, read to her when she was too tired to do anything but rest. "You're going to be a wonderful father," Hannah told him one evening, watching him as he carefully assembled a cradle he was building for the baby. Xavier looked up from his work, his expression serious. "I hope so. My own father was not around much. I want to be different. I want our children to know they are loved and protected." "They will," Hannah assured him. "You are the most protective man I have ever known, and the most loving, even if you hide it behind all those muscles and that fierce expression." Xavier finished the cradle in November, just 2 weeks before Hannah went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted through the night and into the next day. Xavier paced outside the bedroom, driven nearly mad by the sounds of Hannah's pain and his inability to help her. Finally, just after dawn, the midwife opened the door with a smile on her face. "You have a son, Mr. Zane, a healthy baby boy, and your wife is doing fine." Xavier rushed into the room to find Hannah propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up as he entered, her smile lighting up her tired face. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Xavier approached the bed carefully, afraid his size and strength would somehow hurt these fragile beings. He sat on the edge of the bed and Hannah shifted the baby so he could see. The infant was tiny, with a shock of dark hair and Xavier's own gray-blue eyes. He was making small snuffling sounds, his little fist waving in the air. Xavier reached out with one large finger, and the baby immediately grasped it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered, awe evident in his voice. "Hannah, he is perfect." "We made him," Hannah said, tears of joy streaming down her face. "You and I, Xavier. We made this perfect little person." They named him Jeremiah, after Hannah's father, with Xavier's surname. Little Jeremiah Zane was a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried and seemed to have inherited his father's calm temperament. Xavier was completely besotted with his son, spending hours just watching him sleep or holding him while Hannah rested. "You're going to spoil him," Hannah teased one afternoon, watching Xavier rock their son and sing a half-remembered lullaby from his own childhood. "He is my son," Xavier replied simply. "I am allowed to spoil him." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The freight business continued to prosper, allowing them to hire more employees and expand their routes. Xavier split his time between helping manage the business and caring for Jeremiah while Hannah worked. He discovered he loved being a father, loved the weight of his son in his arms, the trust in those small eyes. When Jeremiah was 6 months old, Hannah broached a subject that had been on her mind. "Xavier, I've been thinking. We should buy some land outside town, build a real house, a home for our family, somewhere with room for more children, for a garden, maybe some horses." Xavier liked the idea immediately. He had been feeling cramped in Hannah's modest townhouse, missing the open spaces of the mountains. They found a beautiful piece of property about 2 miles from Santa Rosa, with rolling hills and a creek running through it. Xavier designed the house himself, a large, comfortable structure with room to grow. He built most of it with his own hands, with help from some of the freighters who worked for them. Hannah supervised, making sure the house had everything she wanted: a large kitchen, a proper office for the business, bedrooms for the children they planned to have, and a wide porch where they could sit and watch the sunset. They moved into the new house in the summer of 1880, and Hannah immediately set about making it a home. She planted a garden, hung curtains, filled the rooms with furniture and warmth. Xavier built a barn and bought horses, teaching Jeremiah, now almost 2 years old, how to be gentle with the animals. Their second child, a daughter they named Emily Rose, was born in the spring of 1881. She had Hannah's auburn hair and stubborn temperament, and Xavier adored her completely. Now their family felt complete. 2 healthy children, a thriving business, a home filled with love and laughter. Xavier sometimes thought about his life before Hannah, those 7 lonely years in the mountains. It seemed like another lifetime, like someone else's story. He had been so certain he wanted to be alone, that people could not be trusted, that love only led to pain. Hannah had shown him he was wrong. Love could heal as well as hurt. Trust could be rebuilt, and family, true family, was worth everything. One evening in October of 1882, Xavier and Hannah sat on their porch after putting the children to bed. Jeremiah was almost 3 now, a sturdy little boy who followed his father everywhere. Emily was 18 months old, just learning to walk and talk, filling the house with her cheerful babbling. "Are you happy?" Hannah asked, leaning against Xavier's shoulder. Xavier wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close. "Happy does not even begin to cover it. You have given me everything, Hannah, a home, children, love, purpose. You have given me a life worth living." "You saved my life first," Hannah reminded him. "If you had not come to Santa Rosa when you did, I would have hanged for a crime I did not commit." "I think we saved each other," Xavier said. "I was just as trapped as you were, just in a different way. You freed me from my past, from my loneliness and anger. You taught me how to be part of the world again." Hannah tilted her face up to kiss him, and Xavier responded with all the love and passion he felt for this incredible woman who had changed his entire life. "I love you," Hannah whispered against his lips. "I will love you for the rest of my life." "And I love you," Xavier replied, "always and forever." They sat together as the stars came out, planning for the future, talking about maybe having another child, about expanding the freight business, about taking the children to visit the cabin in the mountains where Xavier had proposed to Hannah. Xavier thought about how much had changed in the 4 years since he rode into Santa Rosa and heard about a woman wrongly accused of murder, how he had almost ridden away, almost decided it was not his problem. Thank God he had not. Thank God he had chosen to get involved, to fight for truth and justice and a woman he did not even know. That choice had led him here, to this porch, to this woman in his arms, to the children sleeping peacefully inside their home. It had led him to happiness he had never thought possible, to a love that filled all the empty spaces in his soul. Years passed peacefully. Jeremiah grew into a strong, intelligent boy who loved working with his father on the ranch and learning about the freight business from his mother. Emily became a spirited young girl with her mother's business sense and her father's quiet strength. In 1884, Hannah gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Samuel and Grace. The house was filled with noise and chaos and more love than Xavier had ever thought possible. The freight business expanded until it was one of the most successful operations in Northern California. Hannah's reputation as a fair and capable businesswoman spread throughout the region. Xavier became known not just as her husband, but as a skilled guide and negotiator who could handle the toughest routes through the mountains. But their greatest success was their family. Xavier made sure his children knew they were loved every single day. He taught them to be honest, to stand up for what was right, to treat everyone with respect regardless of their station in life. Hannah taught them to be strong, to believe in themselves, to never let anyone tell them they could not achieve their dreams. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Xavier and Hannah took a rare day away from the business and the children, leaving them in the care of a trusted friend. They rode up into the mountains to the cabin where they had spent their honeymoon. The cabin was exactly as Xavier had left it, weathered but still solid. They spent the day talking, reminiscing, making love like they were newlyweds again. As evening fell, they sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the sunset over the peaks. "Do you ever miss this life?" Hannah asked, gesturing to the wilderness around them. "The solitude, the simplicity?" Xavier considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the quiet, but I would not trade what we have for anything. This was never really living, Hannah. It was just existing, waiting for my life to end. You gave me an actual life, a reason to wake up every morning excited about the day ahead." "You gave me that too," Hannah said. "After Father died, I felt so alone and overwhelmed. I was trying so hard to prove I could handle everything by myself. You showed me that I did not have to be alone, that letting someone in and sharing the burden did not make me weak. It made me stronger." Xavier pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "We make each other stronger. That is what love does." They returned home the next day to find their children had made them anniversary cards, carefully drawn pictures and misspelled messages of love. Xavier and Hannah read each one, treasuring these simple expressions of their children's affection. That night, after the children were asleep, Xavier and Hannah lay in bed talking about the future. Their eldest, Jeremiah, would be 10 next month. Emily was 8, the twins were 4. Time was passing so quickly. "I want to make sure Jeremiah knows he has choices," Hannah said. "Whether he wants to run the freight business or do something else entirely, I want him to feel free to choose his own path." "Agreed," Xavier said, "and the same for Emily and the twins. We will support them whatever they decide." "You are such a good father," Hannah said, turning in his arms to face him. "The children adore you. Jeremiah wants to be just like you when he grows up." Xavier felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I just want them to be happy, to know they are loved, to have the confidence to be whoever they want to be." "They will," Hannah assured him, "because they have us, because they have this home and this love. We are giving them everything we both wished we had more of growing up." Xavier held his wife close, feeling grateful beyond measure for the life they had built together. From that terrifying day in the Santa Rosa jail to this moment of peace and contentment, the journey had been incredible. More years passed. Jeremiah grew into a responsible young man who did choose to stay with the freight business, showing remarkable skill at both the practical and financial aspects. Emily discovered a talent for teaching and began helping at the local school. The twins developed their own distinct personalities, Samuel quiet and thoughtful like his father, Grace outgoing and charming like her mother. In 1893, 15 years after Xavier first rode into Santa Rosa, he and Hannah celebrated the marriage of their eldest son. Jeremiah had fallen in love with the daughter of one of their business partners, a smart young woman named Catherine, who reminded Xavier very much of Hannah at that age. At the wedding, Xavier found himself thinking about how far they had all come. Santa Rosa had grown and prospered. The freight business was now being run primarily by Jeremiah, with Hannah serving as an advisor and Xavier helping with the more difficult mountain routes when needed. They had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. "What are you thinking about?" Hannah asked, slipping her hand into his as they watched their son dance with his new bride. "How lucky I am," Xavier said simply. "How one decision to help a stranger changed my entire life." "You changed mine," Hannah said. "You saved my life and then you made it worth living. I cannot imagine what my world would be like without you." Xavier kissed her gently, not caring who was watching. After 15 years of marriage, he still felt the same rush of love and desire whenever he looked at his wife. The years had added some gray to her auburn hair and a few lines around her eyes, but to Xavier, she was as beautiful as the day he first saw her. "I love you," he said, "more now than ever." "I love you too," Hannah replied, "always and forever." As the celebration continued around them, Xavier held his wife close and thought about the future. There would be more grandchildren eventually, more joys and challenges, more years to share with this incredible woman. They had built a legacy together, a business, a family, a love story that had started in the darkest of circumstances and blossomed into something beautiful. Xavier Zane, the mountain man who had lived alone for 7 years, had found his home. Not in the wilderness of the high country, but in the heart of a remarkable woman named Hannah Carter. And that home, that love, had given him more than he had ever dreamed possible. Their story, which had begun with injustice and danger, had become a testament to the power of truth, courage, and love. From that first desperate plea through the bars of a jail cell to this moment of celebration, surrounded by family and friends, they had traveled an incredible journey together. And as Xavier looked at Hannah, at their children and their grandchild-to-be, at the life they had built with their own hands and hearts, he knew with absolute certainty that every moment had been worth it. Every challenge they had faced, every obstacle they had overcome, had brought them to this point of happiness and fulfillment. He was home, finally, truly home. And he would spend the rest of his days making sure Hannah knew how grateful he was that she had given him this gift, this life, this love that would last forever.